aside from our Sunday and daily masses, one of the things that we have a lot here in this church are funerals. I get to preside at a good many of them. And pretty much at every funeral, I acknowledge the difficulty, the pain, right, that losing a loved one brings, the pain, the challenges that death brings along with it. But I also point out, some of the silver lining with death. And what I say to people is that death allows us to, thank God, finally get out of here, okay? We finally get out of here. Because, of course, the older we get, the better we know this. Life is good, no question about it. Life is wonderful. But life is certainly not perfect. We know we don't live in heaven. This is not heaven. I say this at practically every funeral mass. I have a mother who's about to turn 95, thanks be to God. She's good, she's about as healthy as a 95-year-old could be, and pretty good in the head, other than, she forgets what day of the week it is and will ask you repeatedly. But, when she was in her 80s, she would say to me, after you turn 80, every year counts for 5. And every now and then, when she's moaning and groaning, which is kind of constant, I say, hey, you remember when you said this when you in your 80s, that every year counted for 5? How does the math work after 90? And she says, don't ask. What we call el peso de los años, the weight of the years. It's very challenging. It's very challenging to go through life as we journey onward. And again, the good news is that we don't have to be here forever. Eventually, what we're deeply longing for will happen. However, wisdom will show us that as long as we are here downstairs, right, we will experience joys and wonderful life-giving moments, life-giving realities, and we will also be experiencing tremendous challenges which compromise the quality of our lives. Jesus makes this tremendously clear in this parable today of the wheat and the weeds, that yes, there is goodness, there's good fruit that is part of this life, but it's always surrounded by bad stuff, by the weeds, by the evils, the dysfunctions, the imperfections that always compromise it. And what's realistic, as long as we're here, is to realize that the kingdom of God, the life that God gives us, thrives in spite of the weeds which surround us. Our instinct is like the instinct of that guy in the parable, one of those servants, right? Who said to the master, hey, why don't we just wipe out all the weeds? He says, no, don't do that. Don't do that, because you're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, all right? You're going to kill the good stuff as well. And, so it is in our lives. A lot of times we wish we could press a button that'll say, delete the bad stuff. Or, just do something that'll just cancel it out, make it disappear. Reality doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. And the reason that God won't do that is because we have to understand where these weeds come from, where it is that sin, which is what creates it, where it comes from. It comes from a misuse of our free will. God will never take away our freedom. God is not about removing our freedoms. That's called cancel culture, okay? God is not into that. God will always respect our freedom. If not, he wouldn't be a loving God. You know, if God were to wipe away our freedom, our ability to choose, you know, we would become, I don't know, inanimate objects. We would become machines or a tree stump or something like that. We would be less than human. We would not be created in God's image and likeness. So, what does God remind us of today? Yes, there are weeds in our midst. There are weeds. There's a whole ton of dysfunction, imperfection in our midst. Don't worry so much about it. Concentrate on the good stuff and concentrate on growing that a little bit at a time. I gave you the short version of the gospel. The longer version, Jesus goes to explain, you know, he talks about how the kingdom of God is like a little seed that grows little by little, and like yeast that begins to grow little by little. The kingdom of God thrives little by little amidst the weeds. If our whole focus is not weed, you know, evil centered. You know, I remember years ago when I was teaching in the classroom, when I was teaching full time. It was long before I became a seminarian. And at this particular school, down the hall from me, I was teaching middle school religion, theology. Okay, we had one of the teachers that we had there, wonderful gal. She was a good teacher. Down the hall from me, again, she was very good. She had one shortcoming. She was very excitable. And boy, the kids knew it, and they knew exactly what buttons to push. And it was like autopilot. I'll never forget. It was like autopilot right after the period, right after lunch. You know, it was like clockwork. You could expect it. You would hear a scream and a slamming of the door, and you'd hear, you know, her voice saying to some kid or various kids, "Get out of my room, you're disrespectful, and go to the office, blah, 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 blah." Well, of course, the kids were used to this, and as this happened on an almost daily basis, they would begin to snicker. They would start to laugh. I have to tell you, it was very hard for me to keep a straight face during this. You know, I did. And once in a while, a kid would say, "Mr. A," that's what they called me back then, "Mr. A, she's crazy." And I would, whenever the kids would say something like that, I would say to them, I said, "Listen, I don't want to hear about any of that stuff. You know, you've got to learn, you know, whether you agree or you disagree or you think that this or that other teacher is fair or unfair or whatnot, you've got to learn to work with them, because that's what your future is going to look like. You're going to have to work and live with people that are sometimes crazy, or most of the time crazy. You're going to have to learn to work and deal with people who can sometimes be unfair. You're going to have to learn to deal with a whole lot of difficulty that you may not necessarily be able to control. Welcome to life. Welcome to life. Just focus on what you're supposed to do, that is right, and learn to speak their language. Don't give them more than they can handle. And by the way, this is not just something, all these weeds are not just something that grow outside of us. This dynamic takes place within us. We also have to learn, you know, with God's help, of course, to be at peace and to work within the weeds that grow within us, within our bad habits. And that doesn't, and by the way, that doesn't mean being complacent about it at all. No. But they don't go away by pressing a delete button or by wishing they would go away. We know that life doesn't work like that. We've got our bad habits, we've got our weaknesses, our handicaps. Those are the weeds that constantly grow within us. Yet there's good fruit within us. Focus on the good fruit. Don't worry about the weeds. Cultivate the good fruit little by little. May the Lord, as we take this message home and try to integrate it all the more in our lives. May the Lord help us to remember that we're not in heaven yet. We're here. There's wheat, there are weeds. Let us focus on the wheat. Amidst the wheat, let us try to grow it little by little. And then the kingdom of God really will not be very far from us at all.